Hi, the name of this Blender video tutorial is SculptMode. One of Blender's mesh modeling modes is called SculptMode. Like Edit Mode, it allows modelers to modify sub-object elements. However, instead of manipulating vertices, edges, and faces individually, SculptMode uses a brush to dynamically select and modify vertices according to the various brush parameters. To demonstrate Blender's Sculpt mode, I've placed in my Blender scene a primitive sphere object. Sculpt mode requires that the object to be sculpted must have a significant number of vertices upon which to perform the sculpting operations. For this reason, Blender has a multi-resolution modifier designed to facilitate sculpting operations. I'll select the sphere object, go to the modifier editor, and add a multi-resolution modifier. The multi-resolution modifier allows modelers significant control over the subdivision of an object. I'll click on the Subdivide button once. This sets the subdivision level for Preview to 1. This refers to the subdivision display of the object as viewed in the 3D viewport display in Object Mode. It also sets the subdivision level for Sculpt to 1. This refers to the subdivision display of the object as viewed in the 3D viewport display while in Sculpt mode. It also sets the subdivision level for Render to 1. This refers to the subdivision level of the object as rendered. Typically, sculpting requires a high level of subdivisions. I'll click on the Subdivide button 4 more times, raising the subdivision level for Preview, Sculpt, and Render to 5. Once the object has been subdivided with the multi-resolution modifier, the subdivisions can be adjusted for Preview, Sculpt, and the Render displays. I'll lower the Preview to 3, the Sculpt to 4, and I'll leave the Render at 5. I'll also press the Smooth button in the left tool panel, which will display the object smoothed in Object Mode. Each sculpted object may require a different multi-resolution setting depending on the object itself, and also, quite importantly, the ability of your computer to handle the subdivision display. You may want to limit the display to only the object being sculpted. An easy way to do this is to go to the Properties panel on the right, and in the Display panel, checkmark Only Render. This will hide all of the non-renderable Blender elements like the grid and the lamps and the camera. With the sphere object selected in Object Mode, I'll switch to Sculpt Mode by clicking on the Mode button in the bottom menu and select Sculpt Mode. Once in Sculpt Mode, a new set of Sculpt tools are displayed in the Tool panel on the left. Notice also that my cursor has now changed to a circular brush. The default sculpting brush is called the Sculpt Draw Brush. I'll click and drag this brush across the surface of the sphere. This draws out vertices, creating a curved ridge-like effect. The brush radius, or brush size, is set by the radius slider control. A fast way to set the brush radius is to press the F key. This displays a representation of the brush radius, and you can drag your cursor to increase or decrease the brush radius. The strength of the brush is controlled by the Strength slider control. A fast way to set the brush strength is to press Shift F. This displays a representation of the brush strength, and you can drag your cursor to increase or decrease the brush strength. The Sculpt Draw brush is by default additive in nature. That is, it draws vertices out from the surface. This can be changed by clicking on the Subtract button in the Tool panel. This moves the surface vertices inwards. An easy way to switch from additive to subtractive is to hold down your Control key while dragging the brush. This causes the sculpt brush to switch from additive to subtractive. These three keyboard shortcuts, the F key to set the brush size, Shift F to set the brush strength, and the Control key to switch between additive and subtractive, are three very important keyboard shortcuts to memorize and use when sculpting. They make the workflow of sculpting much easier and more intuitive. Blender has 20 different preset sculpting brushes. These are accessed by clicking on the active brush in the left tool panel, which displays all the available brushes. One handy brush is called the grab brush. This works well for grabbing large portions of the sculpted surface and moving them about. Grab selects a group of vertices on mouse down and pulls them to follow the mouse. The effect is very similar to moving a group of vertices in edit mode with proportional editing enabled. The clay brush is quite useful for laying in basic shapes in either an additive or subtractive method. The crease brush creates sharp indents or ridges by pushing or pulling the mesh while pinching the vertices together. The smooth brush, as the name implies, eliminates irregularities in the area of the mesh within the brush's influence by smoothing the position of the vertices. The flatten brush finds an area plane located by the default at the average height above and below the vertices within the brush area. The vertices are then pulled towards this plane. The snake hook brush pulls vertices along with the movement of the brush to create long snake-like forms. You might want to spend some time experimenting with the various brushes, their size, and their strength. I'll go back to the default Sculpt Draw brush. In the Stroke panel, I'll checkmark the Smooth Stroke checkbox. Smooth stroking makes the sculpt brush lag behind the mouse movement so that it is easy to create very smooth and flowing brush strokes. I'll uncheck Smooth Stroke. The settings in the Curve panel determine the shape of the sculpt brush tip. By default, the tip has a soft curve. However, there are other preset curves that can be selected. I'll select this squared brush tip. I'll select this pointed ridge brush tip. You can also create your own tip by adjusting the curve. Another quite handy feature of the Sculpt tool is found in the Symmetry panel. Here I will activate the Mirror X Symmetry button. Now any sculpting that's done on one side of the central x-axis is duplicated on the other side of the central x-axis. There are a number of excellent Blender sculpting video tutorials on the web that go into great detail on the workflow for sculpting characters. One in particular I'd like to recommend is by Oliver Villardiz at blendhuts.com.